So hello, friends. We are going to be studying or exploring the idea of persuasion together. Like I said in my email, I had this very gigantic description of this workshop, which is going to take us from independence to McCarthyism, which is like a really giant chunk of history and completely impossible in 55 minutes or less. So my invitation to you all the while that we do this is to not just think about the particular content we're going to zoom in on, which has to do with World War, war, let's say. But we are going to look at it also as kind of a template that you could, if you looked under the hood and looked at the mechanics that are operating underneath, you could slot in any content that you're responsible for teaching. So that's my invitation to you. So I do recognize that I'm asking a lot of you at the end of the day to kind of think logistically and conceptually and about what's right in front of you. So thank you for hanging in with me. So our aim together today is to explore ideas about how artworks in particular can help build media literacy, which we know is something that is a valuable skill, but then also to differentiate between persuasion and propaganda. So one of the big things that comes up over and over again for the 10 years that I've worked now at SAM is that teachers are trying to find ways to give that exploration of the difference and distinction between persuasion and propaganda over to their students. So instead of just giving them a definition and saying this is what it is, my intention is that we're going to explore the definitions together briefly, and then we're going to start applying them to kind of see how they work and do they need any sort of revision. So you'll see that we're going to establish a shared vocabulary. We're going to compare two artworks. We're going to start to apply the thinking. That's when we're going to use Jamboard. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat. And for those of you who are joining via recording, you'll see that later. And then we're going to reflect out and consider the implications. So I always overstuff, so I apologize. I'm going to, at some point or another, have to accelerate because I always put too much in. But here we go. So my starting point for us is to really start to think about that distinction between persuasion and propaganda. And as you can see at the bottom right, this is the definition that I got off of Read, Write, Think, which I think is an interesting starting point. And I think that for me, what I've started to really zoom in on is that second bullet point, that propaganda is really a single point of perspective that's driven home many different ways. And in my experience of it anyway, very specifically focused on fear as the way to get that idea or that one perspective into my head. Whereas persuasion for me feels like there's kind of at least a nod to somebody else's perspective. And I'm curious, does that ring true for you all? And if so, how? You're welcome to, or if not, why? Because that's equally valuable. You're welcome to either unmute your microphone or share in the chat. Just generally, how does this work for you? How does this feel for you, these definitions? Jump in.
From my perspective, this is Sarah. I agree 100%. I've noticed that propaganda does really heavily push on those concepts of fear, like I'm afraid to do this, or it's fear driven, or even just scare tactics. Honestly, a lot of times. Whereas persuasion is it's trying to create a factual base of knowledge, and it's looking across the breadth. So maybe it could be historical information that's woven into how things have gotten where they are, and it's also usually multiple perspectives. So it's not just, like you mentioned, a singular perspective on the issue.
Thank you. I'm taking notes in the chat just because that's how I work. Just jump on in.
I'm curious as to the last under persuasion. It starts with relies upon facts, morals, and emotions, but then the last comment is often relies on opinion. So that I kind of said that thought about that. But the other thing is when I teach persuasion, I expect my students to offer a counter argument. They must present a counter argument and answer that counter argument as part of their persuasive essay or whatever it is they're doing, where propaganda, I don't feel even recognizes a counter argument at all.
Awesome.
I would concur with that. I teach rhetoric, and that's the same thing that we require of our students, that if you give a point, you have to give a counterpoint and be able to defend and articulate your opinion. So maybe that's where that comes in. But there is the expectation that there is a willingness to listen to the other side and even learn from the other side as well. So that you're not going in with I'm going to master over, I'm trying to persuade a point, but I'm also open to learning and to changing my position, which is also something that I have found interesting to watch students navigate.
Wonderful, thank you. One last thought?
Can I ask, also add and ask, but
Yeah.
I feel like in propaganda, there's sort of an underlying threat of harm that might come to you, or something negative might happen if you don't accept this, versus persuasion, I can walk away from it without that threat or feeling of loss. And I don't know if others might want to speak to that.
Thank you. One note that I found online that I thought was really interesting was persuasion, I want to convince you of something, whereas propaganda is shoulding you. And I don't know if that connects at all with what you just said, but I liked that idea of like, you should do this, or this bomb, 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 like the dagger is going to fall from the sky, right? Whereas being convinced it feels different somehow. Deborah, tell me more about Athena as the archetype. That is like a wonderful note.
Oh no, I can't tell you because I will keep you in talk. Like I have an obsession with Athena, but Athena is the goddess of war, wisdom, and weaving. And what she does, particularly in the Oresteia, and if you haven't read it, what Athena does is she brings in a new order. That new order is persuasion, not by force, but by reason. And it's compassionate, and it's listening, and it's hearing all sides of the story. It's creating a human jury. It's the relationship between the divine and the human in all realms. So for me, Athena is an archetype of proper, respectful persuasion that acknowledges the dignity of humanity. So
thank you.
The Oresteia is my favorite.
Okay. My book list or book stack over there is quite tall, but I suspect it's getting taller all the while. Thank you so much. Okay, so do we feel like we're in a good place? Like we have enough of a hand around this right now to be able to move comfortably forward? I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, good. So the approach we're going to use, as I said at the top, is we're going to compare two of these works from the collection at SAM. And we're going to be using a thinking routine whose purpose is to make thoughtful comparisons. So again, I'm choosing this thinking routine specifically to reinforce the idea of persuasion, because we're making thoughtful comparisons. So just like for teacher talk purposes, that's part of the reason I chose this particular approach. So I'm going to give you a minute to just look all over at both of these objects, which is kind of an unusual approach if you've come. I see many familiar faces. If you've come to workshops of mine previously, I usually put up one artwork at a time, but this time I'm going to ask you to look at them kind of in conversation with one another. And this is where we're going to start kind of testing our definitions of persuasion and propaganda. So my query to you at the start is, when you look at these two objects together, what is the same, or what do they seem to have in common? And you can either share that aloud and I'll type it in the chat box, or you can type it in the chat box, whatever suits you. But the intention is to really make a really long list. And Ellen has started us off, thank you, with colors. So the colors seem the same. The earth, beautiful. Anything more? Large figure in sky, beautiful. Concepts of war and strength. Interesting, love this. Texture, visual texture, thank you, Jamie, welcome. A vertical arrangement, thank you. Appeal to liberty, all right, excellent. Buy bonds and patriotism, okay. Denise says movement. This tall central figure is something that Abby is noticing. The clouds. Anything more? These are such unusual images to draw comparisons between, right? We're looking for similarities, and it seems funny to ask for those similarities when the content seems so different. Water, earth, and air, tiny structures in the background. So interesting when we start to think about this as a strategic choice, right? This is visual communication. The structures seem less important somehow than these figures, these central figures. Nick is noticing that both of them have a horizon line. So if we looked at, if we kind of chopped off the wording, like I'm literally trying to blake it off with my hands, the horizon line is kind of at the middle on the right side or just barely below the middle on the left side. Jen is adding earth tones, beautiful. Riveter, I love this word, this name. The words perish in war, okay. A block along the bottom for most of the words. So the words are being somehow called out by this kind of box. Denise is noting that none of these figures, while they're really important and central, are not centered, which is really important. Thank you very much for calling attention to that. Anything more that's common or has a pattern? Small figures in the background with something in the distance. So there's depth. This is expansive. This is not a flat space. Okay. Anything more that you're noting? Water and wheat. There's not a lot in these spaces. So there's expansiveness in a lot of different ways. Movement, beautiful. Reflection of each central figure. Ooh, Denise, tell me more about that one, because I don't see the reflection of the central figure on the right side yet. I just need a little
In the
help.
children.
Ooh, thank you. I hope you just saw everybody's face just went, oh.
I had to really reach for that one.
I like that though. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The theme of security, beautiful. Okay, so when we're seeking these commonalities and patterns, we can actually find quite a few, which is, I think, kind of awesome. Here's where I hope we start to recognize that starting with the commonalities could be really valuable, because the differences are, I imagine, going to be a lot easier to find. So why don't we name like as many differences as fit into the next minute and a half? What is different? Humans. We got humans in one and then sort of not humans in the other versus the statue. Love it. The Liberty poster is focused on war, monochromatic on the left side, so predominantly one color on one side and more colorful on the right. In one, we have these airplanes. We don't have the sky filled with airplanes on the right. We've got growth and destruction, burning and scorched, whereas one feels hopeful and peaceful. Beautiful. Anything more that you're noticing? The reflection itself is different. Thank you. I love that we're bringing that and exploring that idea. Organic on the right side, more perhaps mechanical or man-made on the left, abstract versus realism, heritage assured and heritage endangered. We've got text over the image on the right side, whereas we didn't have it on the left. Beautiful. On the right side, we've got this hand, which is the strength. That he's like gripping the wheat. He's gripping his little boy's hand. He's looking off into the distance, whereas the actual hand of the Statue of Liberty has been crushed and fallen into the harbor on the left side. Blue and gold on the right side. Appreciate that. Fiery and peaceful. Okay, so we see that there is similarity and difference. My query for you is, what do we gain when we look for both similarities and differences? What do we gain by comparing these two? So on the left side, we have a war bonds poster from World War I. And on the right side, we have a war bonds poster from World War II, just to give you a little bit of context. On the left side, it was printed in 1917, and on the right side, it was printed in 1942. So we're just a year into World War II. The US was into World War II for just a year by then. What do we gain by comparison here? Different perspectives. Thank you. Anything more? So we're looking at details and emotions. Denise is noting also that we're getting shifting attitudes of the same people, right? These are American posters made for Americans to be displayed in the United States at wartime, right? On the left side, the wartime was World War I. On the right side, it's World War II. Different techniques. So we're noticing the manner in which the artist is speaking to the audience can be quite different. We might explore for ourselves the efficacy of those different approaches. Molly's thinking on the World War I poster, it's about getting the enemy, versus with World War II, it's about protecting our land. Cynthia's feeling like there's a little bit more fear for the World War II poster, and they had to incite people to get involved, as opposed to World War II, where, you know, Pearl Harbor, and then we're in, you know, and the rationing and all of this like home front effort is at play. Pael says the deeper understanding of the subject matter leads to different perspectives and understandings. Beautiful. So actually thinking about it cognitively about what's going on in our own heads. So let's expand a little bit and just dig down into this experience of home front. So we would think of the military front as being the place where, you know, two armies are meeting and where the conflict is perhaps more face-to-face, particularly at this time period. Whereas the home front is the work that people are doing in the United States or wherever they live that contributes somehow to the war effort. So what do these posters tell us? And I think it was Cynthia got us started, but what do these posters tell us about the differences of being at home during each of these wars?
I have a question. So, I mean, neither war was fought in the United States. So, the fact that the one on the left is depicted like it's in the middle, like it's on fire, like New York is on fire. I guess I had to figure out, because I think they were fighting for liberty or on either one. So I don't know. I guess I'm confused why it would be different.
Ah, cool. I love it.
Yeah.
It's not. What years, Sarah, thank you for asking this question. So 1917 is the work on the left and 1942 is the work on the right. So the attack on Pearl Harbor had already happened by the time the work on the right was made. Okay. Let's skip the bottom right question, because my query to you, I want to drive back to where we were digging into definitions. Which one of these feels, I'm just to say, let's just say both of these are propaganda. Which one of them feels more like propaganda and why? Ooh, just easy peasy. 3, which is the left, the left, the left. Okay. Beautiful. Fear of attack. Interesting. Okay, so on the left, it feels more like propaganda. Molly's saying, if I don't buy the bond, then I'm doing something wrong and I'm not helping our country and we're going to be attacked. Like, if I don't do this, if I don't go buy this bond, the Statue of Liberty is going to lose her hand. Like, that's pretty scary stuff, right? Here's a query though. What is the threat of the right side? It doesn't feel as propagandistic, but what is the threat of the right side? What's going to happen if I don't buy war bonds? Loss of ownership, losing the harvest, taking over. The threat is on the future generations. Like in both cases, I am dooming us to horrible outcomes if I don't buy war bonds. And I can laugh about this now, but I can imagine, because we're living through hard things, that it would be scary. Like, it would land in my heart and I would be compelled, right? So this is interesting to just consider that with a little bit of historical distance, it might be easier to talk about these kind of things and kind of parse out which one feels more like propaganda and which one feels more like persuasion. What I'm going to introduce you to is an artist who's working now today. He's a veteran himself, and he's also making work about war and the humans involved in war. And what I'm going to ask you to do as we look at this video together is to start to think about kind of like, does this feel like propaganda or persuasion and why. And then you're going to go into small groups and dig around in this together. But here we go. Let me see. We're going to first of all see if I'm going to have tech issues, which is quite possible. Let's see. I'm going to move some things around. So as you see on the right side, I'm going to invite you to just catch words or phrases. So we'll take a collective note taking in the chat box. And then once we are done with the video, so don't worry about the question at the bottom there, we're going to start to think about how does the content of the video connect to or challenge what we've talked about so far. So let's see what happens when I push the button.
My name is Aaron Toole, and I mostly just make cups. When I say I just make cups, it's really the only artist statement that I feel comfortable with. The gap between the stated goal and the outcome is often vast and painful, so I'd rather just keep it simple. If the cups are nothing more than cups, that's okay with me. If they are something more, I don't believe it's because of anything inherent to the cups or my skill or craftsmanship, or, I think that it has more to do with the people that accept the cups and share the cups and share the stories with images they recognize on the cups. I joined the Marine Corps for a lot of the same reasons I make art or cups or whatever some art historian in the future is going to call what I do. I wanted to serve. I wanted to share or make the world a better place or do things with my time that I believe are worthwhile. My hope is that the cups will be a place for people who have firsthand experience with war to share their experiences with somebody that they love or care about or trust. I think it's often that people who have firsthand experience just don't talk about it. So to be demonized or idolized for something you did in war they're both difficult. I think it's easier just not to talk, but I think that the conversation's important. I think clay is the right material to work with. Wars are always immediate. We must do this right now. And then in 50 or 100 years, what were we thinking? It's kind of surreal to be in the collection here with Ken Price, who was my teacher, and Peter Volkas, who was his teacher. There's something a little melancholy about being in the collection with Apocalypse 42, thinking about a work that was made in 1942, protesting war and fascism, and then thinking now in 2016 that I'm still making cups dealing with similar issues is a little disheartening, maybe. In the instructions I was given for making this video, I was told to have fun with it.
Okay, so he had fun with it. I love his deadpan delivery, but my query to you then is, let me close this out. I'm going to plug this in. Hear me still? Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So we have Cynthia's like, wow, was that fun? Right, like this is a guy who he's working through some stuff, right? And he's using his work to move through kind of making sense of his own life, his own choices, but then also ever larger issues that he's begging with his work. So thank you, Jen, this idea of art as a healing place. So when we look at this artist's work, just as a note, by 2014, this man whose name is Aaron Toole, he had made 14,000 cups. So 14000 with the intention of, as you saw in the video, having them displayed just en masse, but then also with the intention of giving them away. And he's come to visit the Renwick Gallery, and a good number of the security folks who work in our galleries are veterans themselves, and a woman that received one of his cups while on duty was just like tremendously touched to be acknowledged, and then also to have a work of his that is in the place that she guards now. And so, it's he's doing a lot with his work. So that's Aaron Toole. But when we see his work kind of alongside these war bond posters, what connections did he either make in the video, or are you making in your own minds at this point between his cups and these posters? They all speak to us. Beautiful. So there's something resonant in all of them. I appreciate that. Interesting. Deborah's saying this one doesn't seem to definitively have a sense of persuasion. I appreciate that. Cynthia says war and its effects are always with us. So those are some connections. Is there one more we can find? Each is a way for me to try to understand. Riveter's also noticing this idea is buying a bond is a small price to pay for what he did. So that's a great, to me, segue into this idea of extending. So how does seeing Aaron Toole's work alongside these two war bond posters, how does that stretch or extend your thinking about the posters' messages? War has a cost. Okay. The physical sense of holding the mug. This is a very immediate medium, right? Aaron Toole said that he thinks clay is the best way to do his work. I find it noteworthy that none of the cups of his that I have seen have a handle. So you have to actually put your hand right on the cup, on the body of the cup. And I think about how if I were to fill that cup with a warm liquid, the warmth would come through the ceramic and then, of course, over time dissipate. And that, to me, for myself, I don't know that this is a curatorial statement, but it has a sense of cooling, right? Like this is about the humans that went into war. But the idea of passing the mug hand to hand is quite different than me going and buying a war bond, which is contributing to the effort, but very much at a distance. Any other stretches? It's evoking ceremony. Denise, tell me more. My ability to understand it fully is limited. Is that the extension that you're thinking about?
It's like, I have never been in that experience and I won't be. And so this is the best, or like maybe the closest I can get to it through this conversation piece that each has created.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. So, right, yeah, like the not only physical distance, but experiential distance. I appreciate that. Thank you. Any additional extensions that you're noticing? Riveter, your metaphor game is strong. The war molds you like the potter creates his creation. I appreciate that. So the actual way that the things that we experience shape us. Okay. These are ways to understand and engage. And Sarah's thinking about how the clay gets fired to get its form, connecting to the fire and bomb, kind of the World War II, one poster that we were looking at earlier, the actual physical flames. Denise is noticing a different sense of respect for the message of the posters.
Yes, it is.
Now I hear somebody on the phone, which is totally fine. If you could just grab your mute button, I would appreciate it. Okay, so what about challenges though? What about challenges?
Yes.
How does Aaron Toole's work challenge the posters, or vice versa? Comfort. One feels comfortable. Okay. So a form of comfort. Thank you. One is sort of like a form of agitating, and one is a form of comfort. And Deborah's noticing that we're thinking, probably particularly because I presented you with the video instead of an image of his cups, I've invited you to think about the artist himself rather than the action that you're being asked to take. So thinking about the presentation of information might be an interesting way to go with your students. The clay is healing, a place for creative rumination. And then Molly is noting about how how Aaron Toole reflected on being either demonized or idolized for serving in a war, whereas the posters are just presenting service as this heroic or exemplary action. And then, oh, interesting. Jamie has noted the idea of the clay itself coming from the earth. And so our good earth, the message of the World War II era poster, could feel more embodied as a result. Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so we could go on and on about this, but what I love is that you already are having conversations essentially with one another in the chat box, and that anticipates what we're about to do together. I wanted to try out Jamboard. I have never done this before, so we're all having an experiment together. I created the Jamboard that you can click through to in the link there. Before you click, oh, hooray, it's great. I get an endorsement. I appreciate that. Before you click through though, I'm going to just give you the broad strokes. I'm going to pop you into some breakout rooms, and then you're going to fly away and hopefully be able to join each other in Jamboard. Okay, so each of you has the same setup. We are 20, so what I'll do is I'll send us off into 4 different breakout rooms. So you'll be with 4 or 5 folks. The intention is that you're going to work together on the Jamboard of your number. So if you're group 1, you're going to go to group 1 board, et cetera, right? There's a quote. You all have the same quote, and then there are some discussion questions that follow. The first is, would you classify this artwork as persuasion or propaganda, and why? And then you have a choice challenge. So this would be an opportunity for you guys to vote and decide on how you'd like to spend your time. The first option is, what could you add to this image to make it more persuasive? And then you would actually work together to change the artwork on Jamboard. Or alternatively, you would find an example of propaganda from the internet to juxtapose with this one. So that if you say it's propaganda, like try to find a propaganda artwork in another direction. If you say it's persuasion, try to find persuasion or propaganda. Oh my goodness, Denise, I'm so glad you're getting taken care of. No worries. So, okay, are there any questions before I send you off into your breakout rooms about what you're going to be doing in Jamboard together? I'm seeing a lot of no's. No, we're good. Okay. I'm going to give us 12 minutes, which is super arbitrary, to do this work. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to give each other a tour of our Jamboards. Okay, ready, set, go. And off you go. I was welcoming everybody with a mute on.
People's comments. Oh my God.
Hey.
Welcome. Oh, Denise, that's okay. Tech difficulties happen, and we will still be able to learn from each other. It's great. So I've restarted the recording. I'm going to close my little breakout rooms thing so I can see everybody's beautiful faces. We have like 5 minutes to do this in, so we're not going to be able to go like really, really in depth. But from group 1, would you, everybody can see Jamboard with me right now, I hope. Group one, what is something that came out of your conversation that you want to share with the whole group?
I think one thing is that we ended up with this being we felt like the cups were more persuasion because we felt like it invited a conversation. We had a lot of like wonders about it. It led to a lot of like really good discussion about what is and what isn't propaganda and persuasion, and like what the cups were with his quote in the video. And then like, so we chose to juxtapose it with a piece of propaganda because we feel like propaganda doesn't invite that discussion and that wondering. It invites a, here is what you have to believe. Whereas the cups, I mean, he even, like, we thought the line where he says, if you're ignorant of what's happening, that's not okay. We want them to spark a conversation. So that's kind of what we ended up spending a lot of time discussing.
Cool. Thank you, Molly. All right, group two. I love that you added to this Jamboard. Awesome. What, in addition to your peace symbol, what came out of your conversation that you want to share with everyone?
Well, we went with item number. We went with A, and we talked about the need maybe for a one-word, I don't know what you want to call it, a conversation starter to really advance this. We thought that the mug with the picture on it, especially the color, really stood out, and we viewed that as more persuasion. Cynthia, I'm going to ask you to talk to what you were talking about in terms of juxtaposing it with peace. Propaganda with peace, I'm sorry.
Sorry, had to unmute. We were saying that if it's propaganda, or we felt it was more persuasive, and we thought it might be a stronger persuasive argument if there were, in terms of adding to the image to make it more persuasive, to give the kind of the flip side of war and make the counter argument of peace. So somewhere have some, and so that's why we have our peace symbol. That would give a counterpoint to the discussion.
So that's, if I'm hearing this correctly, it sounds almost like his message felt so subtle that you wanted to get some contrast or conversation starter so that it made it almost more obvious. Did I get you, or am I reading in?
Yes, I think that's part of it. And as we had brought up earlier, that with the difference between propaganda and persuasion is that persuasion often considers the other side of the argument. And if this is an argument about war, there might also be a discussion about peace.
Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate that. That's awesome. All right, group three, tell me about your work. What came out of your conversation?
We had a lot of wonderings, a lot of questions, and we put it on the post-it, but it's a little bit, it says we zoomed in through the Renwick website and viewed the image from there. So we looked at it separately from the picture here. And then, so we had a lot of questions, and we were really getting into the detail on each cup and what was there, and whether or not the work was to be perceived as a whole and as a narrative, or, you know, could you look at each individual piece? And
cool.
We were really interested in looking at Susan was saying she really wanted to, you know, see the whole cup, you know, from all around, and we talked about maybe having some kind of device so we could, you know, like putting each cup on a lazy Susan and looking at
how cool that would be.
from,
yeah,
or looking at it from an app, you know, on a pad, so you could kind of do the 360.
Yeah.
But then other people in our group had really, you know, good ideas and good questions. So I want them to speak if they can, if there's time.
I'd love to hear one more voice. Yeah.
We were curious, the 3D is on it, the colors used. We really didn't because we couldn't see them, we have to be honest, we couldn't see them too clearly. It was hard to decide if it was propaganda or persuasion, because we couldn't kind of figure out what it was. We did assume that the man's face was a dictator. We kind of made that assumption.
Yeah.
That was about it.
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you for noting that for me. Yeah, so some of the things that I know are on there are, there's like a bomb on the top left, there's troops in gas masks, there's a skull, there's a purple heart, and what he'll do is he'll take people's insignia and press it into clay and make cast versions of other people's award. Why can't I think of the words? I'm going to say awards, but I think you know what I mean. And then also he does photo transfers. So he'll print onto a clear transparency, the photograph or portrait of usually people in their dress uniforms, and transfer that onto the glaze so that there are actual veterans there. You're right, though, that the man depicted here is a dictator. So there's quite a variety of images, but very important. Next time I will include the link to the artwork so you can get in there and see it really closely. All right, so since group 4 had tech issues, I'm not going to make you talk us through anything, and we're also always running late because that's what I do. I did just want to nod to the closing reflection, which is just an opportunity to kind of go back to that thinking about the consequences of persuasion. So thinking about how does this apply back to my classroom content. So for instance, if you chose a persuasive letter, just starting to think about like, how does this architecture that we explored together fit into your the work that you're responsible for teaching. But then also it's an invitation to look a little bit to our own lives. So thinking about how do we give our students an opportunity to connect classroom content to their lived experiences and recognize that there's persuasion and propaganda in everybody's life. And we might not always think of things as persuasive when they are intended to be so. So that if you would like to, I'd love to have you stay on a little bit and do the 3-2-1 bridge, the other half with me, but I want to also be respectful and just say it is 5 o'clock Eastern. And if you would like to end your day at this point, that is okay by me. So you can just sign right out, and anyone who would like to stay, I'm going to stop the recording now and we can just chat. So.